Constant uncertainty is a given for every human being. So why are we so obsessed with it right now? Well, obviously, to many of us, the world feels a little crazy and unstable. And this is deeply troubling because our brains crave the opposite. We build environments, from houses to organizations and cities, that seek to make the world feel more predictable, more certain. So we live in this paradox between reality and desire. In this show, we talk to one of the world's leading uncertainty experts, who, although an incredible statistician, recognizes that thinking about this most slippery of subjects is equal parts science and art. So tune in to a brilliant, mind-expanding conversation with Professor Sir David Spiegelhalter about his amazing new book, The Art of Uncertainty.
Hi, friends. Welcome to The Evolving Leader, the show born from the belief that we need deeper, more accountable, and more human leadership to confront the world's biggest challenges. I'm Scott Allender.
And I'm John Gomes.
How are you feeling today, Mr. Gomes?
I'm feeling really uncertain. No, I'm not. I'm feeling really excited about this conversation because the topic that we're talking about seems to be pervasive at the moment, and there's a good reason for that. And so to be able to wrestle it down with one of the world's leading experts in it is going to be absolutely fantastic. So I'm feeling very excited. How are you feeling, Scott?
I'm feeling very thankful that it's Friday. I'm feeling that it's been a full week, good week, but definitely lots of competing priorities for my attention. So I'm really been looking forward to this conversation. What a wonderful way to cap the week with the conversation that we're about to have. Because today we're joined by David Spiegelhalter. And he's Emeritus Professor of Statistics at the University of Cambridge, and his best-selling book, The Art of Statistics, has been published in 11 languages. He was knighted in 2014 for services to medical statistics, was president of the Royal Statistical Society, and became a non-executive director of the UK Statistics Authority in 2020. And his latest and brilliant book, The Art of Uncertainty, How to Navigate Chance, Ignorance, Risk, and Luck, is incredibly useful as a set of tools to help us get a hold on how to think in a more uncertain world. David, welcome to The Evolving Leader.
Oh, great pleasure to be here.
David, how are you feeling today?
Oh, a usual mix of sort of anxiety and imposter syndrome, but I got so used to it over the decades that I just mooch along in my usual way.
That rang true for me too. I don't know. I felt that.
And everybody listening.
Yeah.
I know. No, I finally think I've conquered my imposter syndrome almost, and yet it just keeps erupting up at moments. What am I doing here? Someone's going to find out.
So uncertainty is understandably everywhere right now. It's a topic that's been on the uptick of consciousness perhaps since 2008, and the global financial crisis, and then Trump and Brexit and Ukraine and AI. How does uncertainty affect us at the most human level, do you think?
Well, all the time. I mean, we live in an uncertain world, and as humans, we seem to have got rather good at it, or rather used to it, is not knowing what's going to happen and not knowing what's going on in most of the world, and not knowing what's gone on in the past and why it happened. I mean, we actually live in a complete sort of huge sort of cloud of ignorance with this little bit of stuff we know about in a tiny little bubble around us. So I think that it is the natural way to live, and I think it's actually good to acknowledge it, that that's the way we are. The definition of uncertainty that I like is the conscious awareness of ignorance. So it's a sort of metacognitive thing. We're actually aware of how we're thinking, and we realize when we acknowledge uncertainty that there's so much we're ignorant about. And that, in a way, is not only, fine, it's actually just inevitable.
So I have so many questions, but let's start with, from my perspective, I'm thinking about leaders that have been sort of trained to eliminate uncertainty from their thinking through exhaustive planning and control, and now are feeling particularly out of their depths as they get sort of rocked by a series of systemic disruptions. So what's the starting point for embracing uncertainty? How do we need to be thinking about that?
Yeah, the first thing is you can't eliminate it. And in an uncertain world, which I I think a lot of periods think they live in an age of uncertainty, but I think we can fairly say we're in the middle of one at the moment. One of the first things we have to acknowledge is we can't even think of all the things that can happen. We can't think. I like to think of possible futures, and when people are planning, they like to construct scenarios, a sort of best case, worst case, or something in a central scenario perhaps, and that in no way exhausts the possibilities. So, and we have to realise that, and even in those scenarios, the one thing we know is none of them are actually going to happen as we have planned them. So we have to be ready for that, and we do it in our lives. So we can't, we can't think of everything we're going to be doing in 5 years, 10 years time or so. We can just have a broad idea of the possibilities of where we might be, and try to protect ourselves against the worst things that can happen. And I suppose we're going to come back to this again and again. I think we're talking about resilience. We're talking about not robustness. Robustness is the idea that we've got a long list of possibilities and we've hedged ourselves and we've optimized and things like that. So we're robust to a wide range of circumstances than we thought of. No, that's not enough anymore, because, things will happen that we haven't thought of. And so we're talking about non-optimization, not trying to get everything all perfected, not really. We can't assume there's a mathematical solution to dealing with this, as the sort that we've been taught, and I've been taught. I taught decision theory for years and all this stuff, so I know all about this, but it's just not true in the real world as we operate. And so we have to have this extra idea of being prepared for the things we haven't thought of.
And in the last few years, given, all the things that have been happening in your work, how has that kind of evolved, that thinking and your application of your work? What's the most exciting or interesting things that you've kind of learned through that?
I don't know. I think one of the first ones that really brought this home to me was 2010, when an Icelandic volcano erupted, which I'm not going to try to pronounce. And because of the direction of the wind, the ash came over Northern Europe and closed down European airspace for 10 days. I mean, a complete shambles, absolute chaos. No planning was ready for that at all. And I was actually brought in on the committee that was hastily constructed about what in the UK, but what are you going to do about it? And, it's amazing, they had all sorts of people on it, and it crucially came down to whether the airline manufacturers would allow their planes to fly with in a slightly less precautionary way. And, the UK had a plane flying up there in the ash cloud, taking measurements and showing, you could do it. But there was no planning for it. And so it wasn't on the UK risk register. And you might think, well, that was a black swan. Nobody could have thought of that. They had thought about it. Somebody had thought about it. And actually it did, but it didn't make that this was a possibility, but it hadn't made the risk register. And so there was no thinking about it. So, I don't think there is, although I said, we often can't think of the possible futures, it doesn't mean that nobody's thought of those possible futures. So what that's really brought home to me is, and, in all sorts of other circumstances where surprises have happened, and then afterwards you realize, well, somebody had thought about that, is this idea of imagination. I always think there should be it's like futurologists, I suppose, but in much more specific sense, rather than long-term trends, we're thinking of actual specific events. And I always think Imagineering should be a new sort of discipline, like engineering, where you just have to think of things that can happen. And some of the people who actually really thought about this, I think, are the UK Ministry of Defence. So 2 ways. First of all, they've employed science fiction writers. And publish the stories. They're rather good short stories. Of course, none of them are going to happen. But the idea is to, in a way, broaden our thinking. There's a wonderful one about sort of drones all over London, running amok and that sort of stuff. And it's all to do with governance of drone traffic in a dense area. No, you realize, this is something that has to be really thought about carefully, but presumably people are thinking about that. And the other thing the Ministry of Defence, really recommend is the idea of red teams. And they got a whole guidebook of the red team mindset. And, the classic idea of a red team is actually a separate group of people who are there to be critical of assumptions, to challenge groupthink, to think of the stuff that other people hadn't thought of, basically to be, real pains in the what's it. In other words, they're thinking of things that could go wrong. And Ministry of Defence encourage a red team mindset so that even if you are an individual, you have to try to do it yourself. And it's self-criticality. It's trying to challenge your assumptions. It's trying to be aware of your biases and things like that, which I find very difficult indeed. I've got biases up to my eyeballs, and so I've got some awareness of them, but it's very difficult to do anything about it, I think. So it's better if you've got a range of teams, I think. And I mean, there's two elements of that again brings up some of the sort of stories that I'm interested in, and I talk about in the book, and that's areas of super forecasting. Now, super forecasting, the forecasting competitions that have been run are a bit different because they are about specified futures. They're not about general imagining of all the things that could happen. They have a list of futures that people have to put probabilities on them. And when they occur in 6 months' time or something like that, or don't occur, then the best people with the closest probabilities using a proper scoring rule, win the competitions. And, they've shown that, almost amateurs, but who have a particular mindset, can beat some of the best sort of professional analysts. And that's been shown. And that mindset is almost a red team mindset. It's one that is very open-minded, is not stuck on one way of seeing the world. They self-critical. They take advice. They're prepared to change their minds very quickly, very agile. They look for every source of information, including those that might disprove what they originally thought, particularly those. And so it's been shown in all the sort of work that's been done on these competitions, this particular sort of personality or attitude has been shown to be, the most effective. And that has been the best characteristics to have.
What are you seeing in terms of the trend of that? Because it feels like, and this is just my feeling, I didn't study this, but it feels like people are becoming, in many ways, less open, right?
That's a real problem. And do you know this phrase, the hedgehogs and foxes? I think a lot of people have used that. So just very briefly, there's an old story. The hedgehog knows one big thing, but the fox knows many things. And it's foxes who have this agile mind that isn't committed to a particular worldview that do best in forecasting. And hedgehogs who, are part of a group of people who think the same way and try to fit the world into their particular worldview are not good at making these judgments. And I think you're right. There's an increasingly polarized world. People are becoming hedgehogs of one sort or another. And that sort of fluid central ground where you really are adapting to what you hear and very quickly adapting is lost if you have taken up a committed polarized position. So it's a really depressing thought, but could be true. I'm not sure about the empirical evidence on that, but it certainly seems plausible.
You've also noted that people's tolerance for uncertainty varies enormously, and some team members thrive on unpredictably, while others just kind of gripped by anxiety.
Yeah.
If you're a leader looking after a team or somebody who's trying to inspire people, how do you manage those differences so that both the cautious and the adventurous thinkers are heard and the team can still make balance?
Oh, that's I think that's slightly outside my expertise as a common or garden statistician. But it is important because people vary. Actually, people within themselves, they vary very much in their attitudes to uncertainty. They may, as I've known people who took what I thought was extraordinary physical risks and yet were very cautious about their money. So, the people would take, very big social risks and yet being very incredibly cautious about their health. So there's all sorts of variation between us and within us. And we have to take account of those different views. And actually, of course, a diversity of views is a really good thing to have. If everybody was really gung-ho and, risk-taking, well, that could be extremely dangerous. And similarly, if everyone was very risk-averse and incredibly cautious, that would be pretty hopeless too in a team. So it's that range of viewpoints that's such a valuable thing to have. And of course, you've got to have that discussion. An example I used was back in 2011 when Osama bin Laden was thought to be in this compound in Abbottabad in Pakistan, but it wasn't certain at all. And President Obama, I thought, did a brilliant thing, which is he set multiple teams on the job. Multiple independent teams. And I don't know if he deliberately set it up that some were rather red teamish, very critical, and some were more gung-ho and optimistic. But they came up with a very wide range of assessments. He said afterwards that some thought there's only a 30-40% chance he was there, probability he was there, and others were 80 to 90%. They were really confident. So some were being really cautious, or I'm not sure, and he had to then make the decision. But he knew the range of opinion. And he in the end said he thought it was about 50-50 and went for it. And it's right. It was the right decision. Well, unless you were Osama bin Laden, of course. But then, so the point being that, and it's been argued afterwards, there'd been an academic paper written saying that maybe these teams should have got together beforehand and come up with a single view to give to the decision maker. And I think that's completely wrong. I think it's absolutely right that the person who really, in the end, has to carry the can, knows that there's a diversity of opinion from different perspectives and has to make that judgment themselves. But they have to take responsibility for that.
One of the things that keeps on coming up in these conversations is about people's ability to make the distinction between risk and uncertainty, and how that often gets just called mushed up through emotions and so on. How do you help people to think about that?
I don't actually really like that distinction at all, because I just see it as all as a continuum. I mean, risk is, typically one situations where, we kind of know the probabilities, the gambling areas, the stuff where we feel we've got everything in control, and, those sorts of situations when you can optimize and do it mathematically. And uncertainty are those situations when, as I said, you might not even be able to list the possibilities, and you can't assess the probabilities, the evidence isn't very good, and it's all a bit of a mess. And I just see that as a complete continuum, because even in risk areas, there's always judgments, there's always assumptions. I mean, I always carry got it somewhere, two-headed coin, and because I flip a coin, and before I say, what's the probability this coin will be heads? They all says, 50-50. And I say, you're wrong. You made that assumption. You trusted me. You must be mad. So even in those apparent risk situations, you're full of judgments, you're full of assumptions that may be wrong. So I don't particularly like that distinction. And I know in particular, I don't like the distinction between, which was made 100 years ago by Keynes and Frank Knight and others, that in one of them you could calculate the probabilities, in other ones you couldn't. Well, this was before the age of subjective probability, super forecasting, everything, where we know that subjective probabilities can be extremely valuable, can be very good from the right assessors, and so on. And so you don't need to be able to calculate probabilities based on data in order to make good judgments. So I don't really like that distinction, but there absolutely is a continuum from nicely well-controlled problems where we might be able to assess some reasonable numbers and things, and even what the values of the outcomes are, and optimize, do our proper risk analysis, and the shambles down in the corner of what people call radical, or I like the term deep uncertainty, when you can't even list the outcomes, and you certainly can't think of the probabilities. There are some interesting situations in between, which people think is a bit odd. Ones where you can't think of everything that can happen, but you can think of probabilities. And you may think, what? How can you do that? Bank of England do that. They model the central 90% of their belief about the future inflation and growth and so on. But the outside 10%, the two tails, they don't make any attempt to model. They just say it's somewhere out there. Could be anywhere out there. So they're not putting a probability distribution. Anything could happen, essentially. And in other words, they're giving a probability to none of the above, something else. And I think that's really nice. It's sort of giving a probability to an unstable situation. So that when in COVID, the first quarter of COVID, GDP dropped 25%. It's the classic 25 standard deviation drop. It really happened. But they said, well, sorry, that's just part of the 5% tail. You've got to be ready for this. You've got to be resilient to these things because they can happen. And I really like that idea of having essentially a probability given to everything else that we haven't listed above. The warning. And it's an old idea in statistics, in Bayesian statistics, of what's called Cromwell's law, that you should always have a certain amount of probability unassigned. That's sort of free floating for something we've never thought of, because then it mathematically enables you to adjust incredibly quickly to new circumstances. The brain's, a good fox-like brain, Bayesian brain, will operate like that because they'll never think they've actually got the problem solved.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, super helpful. I like that, thinking of risk and uncertainty on a continuum. That feels true.
Yeah, I think a continuum, and because there's a lot of uncertainty in any risk assessments. There's always judgments and assumptions. Yeah.
So you've shared some really interesting examples, and another story you recount in your book is the Bay of Pigs story, where a 30% success probability was watered down to described as, a fair chance of success, which contributed, of course, to a disastrous decision. I'm curious, do you see similar sort of fuzzy language in businesses, and how can leaders ensure that they and their teams are communicating risks with clarity and precision?
Yeah, I think, I'm not sitting there where these important decisions are being made, but I always just sort of grip the table slightly when people do, when they're talking about important things that could happen to, just use words like could happen, might happen, could possibly. And of course we use this in our language all the time. We can't put numbers on all the stuff we think would happen. But, as I say, a report I just took to about intelligence agencies that have gone beyond this. I've got on my desk, right in front of me, I've got a mug from MI5. And because there's, I gave a talk at MI5 and all I got was this lousy mug. So, but it says that here that if I think something is 25 to 35% probability, like the Joint Chiefs of Staff thought for the success of the Bay of Pigs, you have to report that as unlikely. Not fair chance like they did, which was just hopeless. So, and if I use the word likely in an intelligence report, and I can use words all the time, but I have to mean between 55 and 75% probability. And just those, they're quite broad bands, but they at least get people onto a similar wavelength of those, of use of words. Same things used in climate change. They've got the word likely is used in lots of different ways, but they tend to be around between 60 and 55 to 80%. That's the sort of range that is allowed for it, quite a broad range for likely. And I think this is incredibly valuable because we know that people, because of their risk averse, and their different attitudes to risk, they will interpret words in many different ways.
One of the things that I really enjoyed was the quiz that you had at the Royal Institute talk that I saw a few months ago. Can you talk us through that in terms of helping us to quantify our ignorance? Yeah.
The main thing is, what really annoys me about when people are trying to say predicting the future is they try to predict the future. And they say what's going to happen. I think, I don't want to know what you think is going to happen. I want to know your probabilities for what's going to happen. And so within forecasting competitions, people with good intelligence analysis, people only use probabilities. They don't say, I think this will happen. No, I don't care what you think. I want to know your probabilities. And I want also good evidence that you are a good probability assessor. And you can train people up in that using the sort of quiz that I do with audiences that I got in the book, which essentially just asks them almanac questions, just sort of, which is further north, Brussels or Kiev or something like that. I'll ask. It's a really nasty question. In fact, it's a really horrible one, but an easy one where, which has got a bigger population, Cambridge, England or Cambridge, Massachusetts and things like that. So I can ask these questions, which I hope people don't know automatically, and ask them, say, I don't want to know which one you think. I want to know your probability for which is right. So I ask, which one are you most confident for, A or B? And then what's your confidence? And it's very simple on a score 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 out of 10, and you're absolutely sure. 5 out of 10, you've got no idea. And the point is then, and people, I do this with school kids, young school kids, and they get it immediately. Well, they certainly do after the first question when they when they make a mess of it. So it's really straightforward thing to do. People can, and we're assessing subjective probabilities for facts. This is really quite a sophisticated idea, and yet it is very natural to people. People can do it. And then, of course, you tell them the answer and you score them. And it's using a particular scoring rule, what's called the Breyer scoring rule, which was developed in weather forecasting in the 1950s. It's the one used in all the super forecasting competitions. And I've tweaked it a bit to make it, I think, easier to use. And essentially, if you say 10 out of 10 and you're right, you get 25 points. If you say 10 out of 10 and you're wrong, you lose 75. So it's really vicious. It's very highly asymmetric. And that's deliberately designed and if you say, 9 out of 10 and you're right, oh God, you get 24. And if you're wrong, you lose 81. I can do that in my head, because of a clever trick. And, so you get your points, and then some people do really people who know a lot or are a bit lucky get quite a lot of points, and people who are quite cautious, the risk-averse people who know what they don't know, often, stay around 5. They do 5, 6s and 7s, and they stay around 0. And then, of course, you get people with big negative scores. The gung-ho people say, oh, yes, I think Brussels is further north than Kiev or something like that. Or I think Barnstable, Massachusetts got more people than Barnstable. Oh, the other one I do is, who's older, President Trump or Charles III? And maybe that's not too difficult. But I don't know, is who's older, the Prince of Wales or the Princess of Wales? And, all these sort of things and then if they get, the gung-ho people get it wrong, they lose 75. And then they try to catch up and they go more 10 out of 10. And they end up with massive negative scores. It's particularly associated, I feel, with young males, but never mind. And I always say, these are sort of people you do not want as your financial advisors because they don't know what they don't know. And the other thing I say, a chimpanzee can get 0 just by saying 5 every time. You should not be getting negative points. So, I think it's a really good, and it's a sort of training exercise that people do to train people in subjective probability forecast assessment, to stop them being overconfident, to stop them saying, oh, I'm 99% certain, when actually this is hopeless. They're not. They're not calibrated. In other words, because if somebody is well calibrated, when they say I'm 90% sure, they're right 90% of the time. Roughly.
Do you know if that leads to sustainable change for people? Like when that overconfident young man gets such a negative score, does he actually shift?
They can improve over a competition. They really can, because they learn so quickly. Oh my God, I've got to be careful. Apart from the ones who say, I've got to catch up and get even worse. But that's that's the gambler who puts even more on after they're losing. Yes. But there's always those, but I say, don't gamble, whatever you do. But people pick up on it very quickly and realize, whoa, I got to be careful. I don't want to lose. I don't want to lose all my points. I'm going to stick to what I genuinely feel rather than exaggerating my confidence.
So that ability to, that kind of metacognition, the ability to actually understand your confidence around what you do and don't know in a situation of uncertainty is incredibly valuable. And it could be applied in lots of different circumstances.
Everywhere. Just in normal life. It just applies.
So what else could we do to increase that, do you think?
I think do this quiz. I think it should be built into school curriculum, quizzes like that. And they have used this. They've used sort of probabilist confidence-based marking for questions rather than multiple choice. And you have to say what you actually say how confident you are in your answer. And I think it's a very good way of marking people's knowledge, because if you know you don't know, you don't get marked down as much as if you just stab at an answer.
Where do you find in your personal life where you might not necessarily always kind of use that for yourself?
Yeah, I don't like it in my personal life because I say all this stuff. It doesn't mean I live it. I'm hopelessly optimistic. That's the problem. So, and I know it. At least I do have that insight. And so I'm a positive liability when it comes to making decisions in the face of uncertainty. I'm countered by my partner, who's very good, much more down to earth. Oh no, we will take more than that time to do something, and pulls me back from my gross optimism about everything we can manage to do in the next 3 hours or something like that.
Well, it's heartening that it's not, you're not perfect.
No, exactly. And, but on the other side, again, what it shows is that in some ways, people are different about different things. When we go on holiday, when you go on holiday, do you plan everything?
No.
Do you know where you're going to stay? Do you know where you're going to go?
What I'm going to do? No.
Well, my wife wants to plan everything. I don't.
Okay. I was different. I used to plan every holiday and, meticulously and where we're going to go and everything. I was on guidebooks and everything. We have to see this. This is where we're going to stay and everything for that. And my partner didn't want to think about anything until she was on the plane, if then. And we've reached a compromise, and now we go sort of backpacking in Asia, and I'm allowed to book the first 2 nights, and that's it. And then we make it up as we go along.
Yeah, it's chaos.
And so I've learned to deal with it. I think this is all right. And at first it's, gosh, this seems absolutely horrific. But I think it's because I'm with her. And I think it is that she's a really good, solid traveling companion that I've dared it. So I've managed to change and become less of a planner and more open to the uncertainty, the possibilities. And it's great. It's wonderful. But it did take a while.
Let's build on that. You said your relationship with travel has changed. Is that the primary way, or what else have you learned about coming to terms with doubt and uncertainty? You wrote about it in a recent piece. I just wanted to flag that.
Yeah, oh, yes, yeah, exactly. No, I felt this quite strongly because the piece I wrote about was my father used to suffer from what he called travel fever, which is apparently there's a term for this in other languages, that it's when your anxiety about what could go wrong or what might happen, your uncertainty becomes so much it paralyzes you. And he had to stop traveling, which was such a shame because he was a good traveler, but he just got so anxious about it. And this is, a standard thing, there are standard intolerance of uncertainty scales. Then if it gets high enough, people have a clinical condition that they just can't deal without being absolutely sure of what's going to happen at every stage. And I still suffer, and I started feeling I was suffering from this a lot. I couldn't sleep for days before going on a trip. I couldn't do anything. I couldn't do it. It was a terrible state. And I went to a psychotherapist. And it was really valuable because I've since found out this is absolutely standard bit of cognitive behavioral therapy that she did on me. But I thought this was great. And she just said, okay, don't try to deny the feelings, feel the feelings, but then just say to yourself, these feelings are identical to what I would be feeling just from excitement of a really exciting, fun thing to happen. The butterflies, the feeling of everything. And so you're just trying to recode in your brain that sort of anxiety into excitement. I mean, it's absolutely, now I know it's completely standard, but I think it's worked to some extent. I give myself a little bit of a talking to, get a grip, man. And I think it's worked to some extent. So what that is again, this thing, we can't, the situation's just as uncertain. I haven't changed what I do at all, none the least. So in a way, the actual chances of stuff happening haven't changed one bit. It's purely the way I respond to it that one can change.
So there's a good reason why your book's called The Art of Uncertainty, because you haven't just got, it's not just a book about statistics. It's also about recognizing, as you say, the map, not the territory, is important. Can we talk about that a bit?
Yeah, no, it's so important because, I'm a mathematical statistician in my life. I've done huge amounts of data analysis and modeling and, using packages, writing packages and doing all this stuff. And, where you are trying to, tame uncertainty and you're getting it into a form of an uncertainty interval that you can calculate about a quantity or about the future or something like that. And I'd done that and taught it all. And it's great, but it's all wrong. And that's not really fair to say it's wrong because it sounds like you can throw it out. No, it's deeply limited. And so my book is really about, and why it's called The Art of Uncertainty is that it's not a science of uncertainty. This is not an algorithmic process to go through all this. Although I've taught it as that. Work out what the options are, what the possibilities are, put your utilities on them, assess the probabilities, calculate the subjective expected utility, and there you know the right decision to take. I've taught that for years. Well, it's nonsense, it really is. Well, it's not nonsense, but it's a sort of idealized package that really is not going to work in most circumstances. So so a lot of now what I teach or talk about is trying to quantify as much as you can while being fully aware you can never do it. So I really love statistical analysis. I like good models and things like that, but none of them are right. It's an old saying, all models are wrong, but some are useful. And you really have to get that into your mentality. And so every time I see a calculated interval, a p-value, all these things, I just know they're all wrong. Because they're all assuming the truth about that the model, every assumption in the model is true. And this is definitely not the case. Now, they may not be importantly wrong, but they're just not wrong, not right. They're not a fact about the world. And this is very, I think, quite humbling and very valuable because it gives you a degree of humility about any analyses you might do. And that's why, as I said, the simplest thing of asking people what the probability of a head is, 50, and they say 50-50, and just say, sorry, you're wrong because you trusted me. I've got a two-headed coin. So you can be caught out at just not understanding something about the problem, and that can mess up everything you've done. And yet you've confidently claimed this analysis. So, and the other side of that is, well, no, not on the other side of that. The one way to contribute, I think, to that humility is something I now do and recommend, and many people do, which is, as well as doing a quantitative analysis and calculating the estimates and the intervals, all the stuff that comes out of the packages, actually to look inside yourself and say, well, how confident am I in this analysis? Do I actually believe this stuff? You know, how good is the evidence? Is the data just so ropey, or am I, you know, am I suspicious about where it came from, or the design of the study, or et cetera, or my understanding of what goes on in the world to build a model, all the distribution assumptions you have to make, the independence of something, you know, just what are all the things that could go wrong? In some situations, you're very confident. You really feel you've nailed it. You understand, you know, you can think of, I don't know, car insurance or something like that. You know, you've got vast amounts of data, you've got a lot of information. Nothing can go that wrong. And so you could have high confidence in your analysis. But if you're doing, I don't know, insurance on, even on spacecraft are becoming more common now, but, you know, on really things that haven't happened, you've got to admit that you haven't got much confidence in all your calculations. And similarly, I mean, during COVID, for example, when the scientist committee were giving advice to the government, they qualified all their judgments by how confident they were in their analysis, into a low to moderate to high, and high confidence that the data we've got can answer the question that we've been asked. And I now do that absolutely routinely and recommend that everyone does. It's a sort of meta view of your quantitative analysis, what I can call indirect uncertainty, not the direct uncertainty about the quantity that's going to happen, but your indirect uncertainty, all the other stuff that makes you, which you might normally just put as little caveats at the bottom of some reports, but that's completely inadequate. You should have that up front. Actually, we don't really know what's going on. Or we really do know what's going on.
Welcome back to the Evolving Leader podcast. As always, if you enjoy what you hear, then please share the podcast across your network and also leave us a rating and a review. Now let's get back to the conversation.
I'd love to get your thoughts on what might need to change in organizational cultures to allow for leaders to articulate the level of uncertainty they might be feeling, because I'm thinking, as you're talking about the pressure that's on people to give the appearance that they know everything, right? Stakeholders and investors and your boss, they want to know that you know. So there's almost this externalized pressure to over articulate your confidence in a decision, perhaps, where actually the real strength might be in being able to articulate clearly the level of uncertainty that's a part of this decision. What are some thoughts you might have for leaders listening right now?
Yeah, no, it's very common, because I talk to people in business, I talk to people in government, and they all say, yeah, but my boss or my minister, I think, wants to know what's going to happen. He doesn't want all this hedging, he laced really tightly defined in a series of calculated options. I think essentially he wants the uncertainty be taken away out of the that bigger uncertainty to be taken out of the problem. And I just say, you've got to tell them. Now, it's partly because they don't want to have to admit it, and they don't know almost what language to use when they're explaining it to others. Politicians are hopeless. They cannot admit uncertainty. They have to be absolutely confident about everything they do, about every decision, and it paints them into corners they can't get out of. At COVID, they couldn't admit that they didn't know what was going on, so they made all these recommendations that then they couldn't go back on, even when they were found quite quickly. I was wiping surfaces and all this stuff. We knew within a couple of months that this was all a waste of time, but no, they couldn't say that. People were still wiping surfaces a year later. So, they can't go back on it because they were so confident. They had no idea of provisionality, that what we're saying it may be fair now, but we're going to change our minds. And that some people who get to a certain level seem to find that completely impossible to do. And it does require confidence to do that. And it does help if you're already a trusted person. You can then admit uncertainty more. Because, our research we've done, and not just us but others, have shown that if you do, in a sense of confident uncertainty, if you bring people into your confidence and say, well, look, we know all this, we know a lot, but we don't know everything, and there are these things we don't actually know yet. And we're doing our best to find out, but we don't know yet. In the meantime, you could do this, but our advice will change. And that's sort of what I would call trustworthy communication of uncertainty is very difficult to find within senior figures. You can find it in COVID. I could see it in some senior scientists, could do that. But among politicians, that's extremely difficult to do. They don't seem to have a language for it. They just think, partly I think they have there's this myth that, if we admit uncertainty, nobody will trust us ever anymore. The public will just reject us. It's completely wrong. The evidence is that we've got from not just us, but from others, is that if you do admit uncertainty and give a balanced opinion of, there are benefits and harms for this policy and thing, but on balance, we decide it's the best thing to do, but, this isn't going to suit absolutely everybody, etc. And there's some uncertainty and the evidence isn't very good. If you give that balanced opinion, then people who are really skeptical of you trust you more. And that's reasonable because you're addressing their concerns. You're saying what they were concerned about rather than just saying, no, what you're saying is nonsense. Vaccines are safe and effective. You say, vaccines are safe enough and effective enough to use on some people in some circumstances, but not everybody at all the time. And there are still some uncertainties. And if you say that, the skeptics trust you more, which means what's interesting is that it means that when the governments, like they do say, deliver this, what you might call persuasive message, vaccines are safe and effective and you should take them, they are actively decreasing trust in the group they're trying to reach. They're making it worse. They're making people who are skeptical trust them even less. But they don't have a language for doing that on the whole. And that's something that's why I push all the time about trustworthy communication, a language for expressing uncertainty. It doesn't mean, we don't know anything or your guess is as good as mine. No, you can't do that. It's terribly important, I think, for the trustworthiness of, in a society which increasingly is becoming polarized with untrustworthy statements coming from both sides, to be honest, from all sides, to hold that middle ground and actually try to realize that there's a balance, there's winners and losers. It's not absolutely black and white, the issue. And to take that position is becoming very difficult. And yet I think it's even more crucial to be trustworthy.
We've kind of talked about this, but not using this word, luck. Where does that fit into your thinking?
Oh, I like luck. I think it's great. I don't think it exists out there. It's not some external force. There's not, the goddess Fortuna is not watching over us and either rewarding us or punishing us. So I'm not believing that. But I think it's a good term for describing really retrospectively, things that happen to us that are unexpected, and are out of our control and yet have an impact, either good or bad. We're on the wrong plane at the wrong time, or we do happen to win a lottery ticket or something like that. So I like it as a concept, and because it has those characteristics, and it's one of the aspects of living with uncertainty is that things will happen to us because we're not in control of our lives most of the time, only to a limited extent. So things are going to happen to us that we didn't expect, and I think to be able to identify that. In a way, I think it's valuable to acknowledge the lack of control we do have. I think we've got many people have said this before, we've got an exaggerated sense of the amount that we control our lives, and we are personally responsible for the situations we're in. And philosophers have really identified this with the idea of constitutive luck. And I love this. This is the luck of just who you were born as. Your ethnicity, your family, your time in history, the place, your siblings, the situation you're born into, your community, and things over which you had your genes, you over zero control. Your parents, you don't choose your parents. They rarely choose you. So,
you've struck a nerve there, I'm afraid.
Yeah. Well, I said in the book, for the book, I researched my own conception, which I think many people still feel slightly uncomfortable at doing.
You said you weren't going to make this personal.
No, I know I made it personal. So it really changed my perspective on my life, to realizing the bizarre chain of circumstances that led to me being here and how easily I might not be here. It's a bit humbling because, to realize how amazingly easily it is that you wouldn't be here. So that's constitutive luck, and that's hugely important. I know who I was born as, where and when is just, it's affected my life all the way through. And then there's, they've identified circumstantial luck, which is being in the right place at the right time, the wrong place at the wrong time, being in the wrong plane at the wrong time or something like that. And then outcome luck, how it happens just at that moment, how it happened to work for you. good or bad. Yeah. And I think it's a good way of taking apart our experiences.
Well, when people look at their decisions and they do the post-mortem on their decisions, how often do they conflate luck, good or bad, with the decision?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is quite reasonable to say that, well, it ended up badly, but that doesn't mean it was a bad decision. And this is a particular case in health decision making, because, if you're in a situation, I've got prostate cancer, so, I've been in a situation trying to make decisions about my treatment, and the anxiety is that, I can't, under whatever the decision, I can't control what's going to happen. Otherwise it'd be quite clear what to do. And you can't, because there's so much uncertainty, it's untrue. But research has shown, and also I feel it myself, is that a big fear is a fear of regret. Oh my God, if only I'd done that, this would have been all right this way. In other words, if only I'd known better at the time, if only I'd thought of that, if only I'd really considered the decision more. So that, because the evidence, I think, is that even if you make a decision and it happens to go badly, well, it's bad luck. Your tumor coming back is, it's luck, really. But if you didn't do everything, you didn't take the step, even the minimal steps to avoid that, then actually you could say, well, I can regret that. I could have at least made my chances better if I had done X, Y, and Z. So I think the fear of regret is very strong in ourselves as individuals, and what that illustrates the fact that you don't regret things so much if what happened, you may not work out well, but if it's just bad luck, well, I did the best I could, and that is, I think, deeply reassuring. Because we can't control everything that happens to us. We can't make sure everything turns out well. We just don't want to be kicking ourselves.
So you've touched on a lot of this already, but as we near the end of our time, how can we better prepare ourselves as leaders for a more uncertain world?
Yeah, I think I've learned this recently. It's not in the book, I wish it was, that people in therapy, family therapy, have developed this idea of safe uncertainty. And what they found is that people used to go to therapists in a state of what they call unsafe uncertainty. Oh my God, I don't understand what's going on. I don't have any control over my life. I'm in a state, or anxious, panic attacks, and so on. Unsafe uncertainty. And they would go to their therapist with the illusion that the therapist could cure them, could turn them into a situation of safe certainty. Yeah, everything's sorted. I have solved your problem. And they could walk out all cured and solved. Now, this, of course, is a delusion in therapy. And so there's this move, which I think is really clever, that you shouldn't even pretend that you can put someone in a situation of safe certainty. What you want to do is try to move them into a situation of safe uncertainty. And that means that we can't solve the problem completely. There'll still be things which you're not in control of. Stuff will happen that you didn't expect. However, what we would hope is that through the therapy, you are now built up the resilience to be able to deal with that in a way that it's not unsafe anymore. And this is now this is used also now in child protection and all sorts of places as a recommended idea. And I really like this. And I kind of think, when I talk to analysts who are advising ministers, I say, don't ever let them think that you can put them into a situation of safe certainty. You are you're their therapists, really. They want help, and they expect to be told exactly what to do or what's the case. Don't ever pretend that you can put them into that situation. What you want to try to do is move them into a situation of safe uncertainty. In other words, we've done our best. We've thought of the things that can happen. We've hedged best we can. And it's not completely safe, but we do feel now we're resilient to what the world might throw at us, up to, absurd levels. Maybe not to an alien invasion, but come on. We've got to draw the line somewhere.
I love that. At the end of your book, you finish with a manifesto for uncertainty, which helps us to recognize that it's our personal relationship to the world that defines our perception of uncertainty. Can you unpack that a little for us? Yeah,
it's something I feel quite strongly. It's actually from my background in Bayesian statistics, which based on the idea that probability doesn't exist. In fact, it's not out there as a property of the world. It's just an expression of our personal relationship to the world. And and this goes along with the idea of uncertainty being a conscious awareness of ignorance. It all comes back to the self, to ourself as a relationship. And I think it's really helpful to realize that we have to live with it. We can even learn to enjoy it in some circumstances. Bit of risk, bit of fun, bit of uncertainty. We like it. We like it. So I think, but we do have to have that humility to realize we cannot totally control everything. We can't optimize everything. We can't model everything. We can have a go. It doesn't mean we shouldn't try, but we can never actually achieve it. And so, and that, it requires both sort of, I think some boldness to really try to think of all the things that might happen in imagination. But never think you actually do it, because you always have to have that built-in agility to switch to when things you didn't expect happen to you. And I think this, for me, writing this book changed my life completely, I think. And so I kind of feel that these lessons, it's not a self-help book, but I'm making it sound as almost as it is a self-help book, because I actually think it is quite I think it is quite useful to have some of these ideas into in your own personal life. But actually, it's also, I feel, quite appropriate to organizations as well.
Yeah, no, it definitely is. And I think, the heart of every self-help book is changing the relationship itself. So you are doing that in a very different way than the typical self-help book, but it is very powerful from that perspective.
Thank you. That's really kind. Although I keep on having to tell my publicist, it's not a self-help book. No, it's got some maths in it. Not much. It's got some maths in it. Because people have bought it, I think, thinking, oh, this will tell me how to live my life in the face of uncertainty. And then they see the binomial equation or something, and they go into a state. Yeah.
Well, Scott and I are avidly not mathematical, and we had Marcus de Sartoy on the show, and he tested us.
Oh, no.
And we failed very badly, didn't we?
Oh, no, I wouldn't do that. No, that would be too mean. Yeah. Then I'm even more pleased that you actually enjoyed it then.
Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant. Yeah, thank you. And thank you for joining us and for sharing some of the wisdom from that book. It's such a rich conversation. Really, really great. Thank you.
It's huge fun. Thank you so much.
And folks, if you haven't gotten his book, The Art of Uncertainty, do that now. I can't guarantee that you will like it, but I'll give it a probability of 9 out of 10. I think you will. So do it. And until next time, remember, the world is evolving. Are you?